Morning. Okay, what are we talking about today? Respiration. So respiratory systems is where we are. Have your lecture notes out and let's get started. I'm going to show the screen and we're going to look at these. So these are the respiratory system slides. Yay, here we go. Cool. Think about the respiratory system. Think about your respiratory system. And what is it for, and what does it do, and why is it here? And there's a little image for you. And if you're not excited about the respiratory system yet, what it does for you. Actually, we probably hear about it all the time now because of COVID. You know, everybody's talking about the respiratory system because it invades the lining of your lungs. Yeah. So anyway, if you're not excited yet, check it out on Crash Course. Another little video from Hank. Okay, some basic questions to think about. Don't forget you have your lecture notes out. You can always stop. But what is it? What does it do? Why is it there? So, as you take a breath in, what are you taking a breath in for? Like, what is this whole thing for? Why are you taking this breath in? Because you're doing it all day, right? What's the point? I bet you know. So you're obviously, gas exchange is one of the big functions. We're taking in oxygen, we're breathing off carbon dioxide. And that is what animals do. They take in oxygen for cellular respiration, they breathe off carbon dioxide as waste. The lungs do the respiratory system does some other things like helps with your pH of your blood and that sort of thing. But for us, that's pretty good. Gas exchange is a pretty good and big function and really important. Do all animals have respiratory systems? No, in fact, they don't. So we'll start with some simple animals on the next slide that they don't need it. So think about why would you not need a specialized respiratory system? So what's going to happen is these gases, oxygen, carbon dioxide, they're diffusing, right? They're moving through the cell membrane, either in your lungs or my lungs, or in like a jellyfish, right? They're diffusing through back and forth. So it's really important to have just one cell layer thick. And that's why our lungs are super delicate, because they are one cell layer thick. I'm not kidding. And so if you are a jellyfish, and I don't know if we've talked about endothermy or ectothermy, but if you're a cold-blooded organism, which you might have heard of that term before, so I think we did talk about it. Ectothermy is cold-blooded. They have a lower metabolic rate. They don't, because they're not heating up their body all the time, right? And they tend to move a little bit, not quite as fast. They don't have to move as fast. So their metabolism is really low. So they eat a lot less calories every single day. So they can just use cells to diffuse. They don't need to have specialized structures. And so one of the things that's tightly knit with respiratory system is the more oxygen you need, like you and me, the more oxygen you need, the more you're going to need to have a specialized system for respiratory system, okay? But let's look at this next slide. Sponges, that's a whole phylum, right? The Darian, Porifera. It's a whole phylum. They're just sitting they're ectothermic. They're just sitting down there, sessile on the bottom. Most of them are sessile, just sort of like anchored on the bottom, not doing a lot. So they just diffuse with some cells. That's it. They still do gas exchange, but they just do it with some cells. Same with jellyfish, okay? When we start to get into vertebrates, we're going to see that things are different. We're going to see that things are different, okay? So vertebrates they have to have specialized respiratory systems. And how does the complexity of the respiratory and circulatory system relate to metabolism needs? So we talked about that a little bit. The circulatory system we're going to see is tightly knit. What do I mean by circulatory system? It's tightly knit with respiratory. So I either have blood or some sort of liquid flowing through my body. I'm an organism, I'm an animal. And that blood or some sort of liquid is going to help me. That blood or liquid will be moving through and it'll have gases to exchange in my tissues, like my fingers and my toes and my whatever, leg. So we have blood, okay, and we'll talk about that later, what is blood and what is not blood. But that liquid is going to be carrying around these gases. And so the respiratory system is the gas exchange place. The circulatory system will move it around the body. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's look at your lecture notes. How do respiratory adaptations minimize diffusion distances? So we need to answer that question. That's on the third. And then respiratory systems and other circulatory systems often work together. Okay. So how does it minimize? What we'll do often is we'll see that we'll have like a folding pattern. So your lungs are actually not just round. Your lungs actually have these things called alveoli, these sacs. You don't need to know that name, but you have these sacs that look like grapes that greatly increase the surface area inside your lungs. In fact, I'm going to blow you away right now. If we took your lungs and flattened them out, they would be the size of a tennis court. I said that. So gills were the first, well, who knows what the first was, but gills are what aquatic organisms use, like fish and some snails. But they use a folding pattern. So the gills are folded, a bunch of foldings. There's a bunch of foldings. So you have a lot of surface area. So you can get a lot of oxygen, right, in the water. It's just dissolved in the water, it's fine. Get a lot of oxygen passing by those little gills, and then you have blood right near it. They're saying capillaries, which is just carries blood. So you've got the bloodstream, and you're able to, very thin, diffusing, get a bunch of oxygen, give off carbon dioxide. So gills do it too. They just have to be wet. So gills work when they're wet. They have to be wet, and then little organism moves, that dissolved oxygen, or that oxygen goes into the gills, into the capillaries. So gills are amazing. And if you are wet and you live in the ocean or live in some water, they work really well, okay? And so I think we answered why you want to minimize diffusion distances. You can only have one cell layer thick because you got to get the gas all the way through. In fact, people that have, you can just think about it like this, if you have emphysema or if you have scarring in your lungs, it doesn't diffuse well. You have much lower oxygen saturation. You have less oxygen that you can get into your bloodstream. Why? Because you can't diffuse that much. You got to have one cell layer thick. Gills do that. One cell layer, very thin and papery, and then you got your bloodstream right there. Diffusion. All right. Gills only work in water though. As soon as you dry them out, they don't work anymore. So terrestrial animals, so we're still talking about vertebrates, you got a backbone. Terrestrial animals needed new strategies. Okay. New strategies. I bet you can think about the new strategy. One of the new strategies, right? You have them. So respiratory systems, you have them. So lungs are one, a good example. I'm going to give you a different example that's super awesome. That's not lungs. Okay. So these are not lungs. So I'm down here and it says, terrestrial animals have internal respiratory structures. They have internal, okay, inside. They can't use gills because they'll just dry, gills will just dry out in the air and that won't work. So inside of us, it is moist, believe it or not, inside our lungs, it's moist in there, there's mucus. So we have an inside, this is a really cool adaptation. There's another adaptation besides lungs that we're going to bring up because it's so ingenious. It's a very successful phylum. Bring on the insects, bring on the arthropods. So it's arthropods do this. Most arthropods have this, okay? And so we have like a little beetle here, whatever, but they have something called trachea. What's trachea are, I know this is a little slightly blurry picture, but what trachea are just holes. I'm not even kidding. Holes, like it would be like a hole in my cheek, a hole in my nose, a hole in my head, but they're all over. And what it allows is just air to go into all these holes, and it's one cell layer thick, and I can do gas exchange. That's how insects do it. So they don't have lungs, They just have a whole bunch of holes all over their body. And then they have cells that do gas exchange all along. And they don't have what we call blood. It's called something else, but it doesn't matter. They have like liquid, it's fine. But that liquid is there circulating around and doing gas exchange. It's brilliant. It's cool. So that's trachea. That's insects. Basically, it's just holes all over the body. That's all you need to write. Okay, next up. So we have trachea. That's so cool. And that's such a great innovation for insects. And they are successful, more successful than mammals, right? In some ways, because there's more of them. All right. So now we're going to talk about lungs. We're going to talk about terrestrial. So on the land, vertebrates, they use lungs. And how do lungs work? And the first lung probably appeared in freshwater fish because they lived in water that didn't have oxygen, so they had to like gulp. Anyway, that's a side note. So we're going to first talk about the simplest lungs. Okay, the simplest lungs are amphibians. And so that's going to be your simplest group, the simplest lungs. And amphibians' lungs are still amazing, okay, still amazing. But amphibians' lungs are not, they don't have that much surface area. And so amphibians have to, let's see if I can get, oops, I gotta go back. I'm gonna annotate, but they have to, so their lung, so imagine this is your lung and it has all these surface area with all these little, and so I'm increasing surface area, every little bubble, right? Now let's imagine an amphibian lung, right? They have less surface area on their lungs. Still amazing that they have lungs, still good. And the air comes inside the body. Gas exchange occurs along the lining of the lung. Very cool. How does it work? The gas comes in. Okay, I'm going to draw it. Let's do it like this. So the gas comes in, right? Here's air. It's oxygen and stuff. The gas comes in right here, and it'll diffuse right through, and it'll go into their bloodstream, and off it goes. That's how gas exchange occurs, okay? With lungs. But they have less surface area on their lungs. Their lungs aren't quite as good. So they also breathe with their skin. So their skin does gas exchange, which means that their skin has to be wet. Remember, respiratory surfaces have to be wet. So this was a big innovation, but amphibians have to be near water. So that's a limitation. All right, let's go to the next one. So that's amphibians. We are now looking at terrestrial vertebrates, terrestrial backboners, okay? Hold on, why is that not working? There we go. All right, a whole new lung. A whole new lung. Reptiles, birds, and mammals have lungs with large surface areas. When I was talking about that tennis court, reptiles do too. So I don't know if they have tennis courts, not all of them, but they have really nice surface area. They do not breathe with their skin. They're totally dry on the outside. So this is another thing about reptiles. They're very well developed for dry land. They were the first to have the lungs inside the body, don't lose water. Really great innovation. And then have a lot of surface areas so you can do all your gas exchange inside your body. It's brilliant. Let's talk about a special reptile, the bird. Oops. Come, let's go to the next slide. Okay, birds. Now in class, or you can watch alone, look at the anatomy of the birds on this little YouTube video. We won't do it in this recording, but birds have the most complicated respiratory system. Yes, more complicated than mammals. Yep. I always think of like mammals have the most complicated everything. Nope, birds do, especially in this case. So the respiratory system of birds is more complex, more efficient than mammals. Why? Why? Don't even worry about what it is. Why? Why? Write it down. Why would birds need to have more efficiency? And what I want to do is, sometimes it's hard, like when these videos get really super complicated. What I wanted to show you is, here's a bird lung. Okay, and then they have these little, this is a little hole through the bird lung, these little sacs down here, okay, specialized sacs. And then they all, so I'm just showing you, so once you watch this video, this might make sense. Right now it's kind of look like a big blob. So the air, so birds have what we call one-way airflow. So here's the bird's mouth, the beak up here. Here's the bird's beak. Yeah, I'm not drawing that because I'm trying to do this with a mouse at home. It's not good. So here comes the air through the lung, down through the lung. And with birds, what it does is it comes down into these sacs down here below and does gas exchange. And then the air is routed back through a different way, back up through the trachea and out of the mouth. Do you see how that was one way? Okay. I want you to contrast that with mammals. Not to say that mammal lungs aren't cool, but they're certainly not as efficient. So there's a mammal lung. Yep, that was a mammal lung. I'm a great artist. So here comes the air with a mammal lung. It comes down and it does gas exchange, and then it's going to let the carbon dioxide out the same direction. So this is two-way airflow. And the problem is with this is you've got mixing down here of both air that's a bunch of oxygen because you breathed it in, and a bunch of carbon dioxide because you're going to breathe it out. You did gas exchange both ways, and it's just mixed in both ways. So you're a lot less efficient. This is a lot less efficient. So you can watch this video here about a bird anatomy and see if that makes sense to you. But birds have the one-way airflow, whereas we have two-way. So ours is less efficient. Yeah. Why do birds need it? So cool. Mammal lungs. So here's our lung, our trachea. This is our airways. And the air will travel. Our mouth is up here. The air will travel down. It has a lot of oxygen in it. Come down here. We'll do gas exchange, very thin. Remember, diffusion distance, just one layer of cells. Do gas exchange and get carried off by the blood system. There it goes, and it'll go out to the body. But at the same time, we're also doing gas exchange with waste. So carbon dioxide is waste. That'll get dumped into the lungs. And the problem is it's in the same spot. So we've got oxygen and carbon dioxide in the same spot. And so there's mixing and it's not perfect. Yeah, it's still good. Yeah. It looks like we have a TED talk about mammal lung function, but I don't see the link here. So I'll fix that before the class opens. Sorry about that. Okay. Human lung function, good. So remember, we are a tennis court. All right. All right, and that's it. Good job. All right, I'm going to stop that here. I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording and have a great day.